Well, unfortunately, we're responding to the opioid epidemic that's present in our own community. And epidemic is a word that's often overused, but it accurately reflects what's actually been going on in our general geographic area, but also specifically within the Native community at Swinomish. Native communities have been subject to cultural oppression, and substance use disorder has been prevalent since the point of contact. The use of heroin and misuse of prescription drugs has affected Native communities. When you look at statistics for Native people in the state of Washington, the numbers are shocking. And when you look at the numbers and the data nationally, it's a huge problem. And the opioid use epidemic has hit Native communities greater than it has pretty much any other slice of demographics in the country.
Well, Suquamish is like a lot of other places and tribes and reservations where we've got a relatively chronic issue of drug abuse. And I think we saw the meth crisis first, and the heroin opiate abuse was kind of in the shadows. And then when the OxyContin epidemic started is when we saw a lot of our young people getting hooked on the opiates.
This term, our tribal council has started to really address the opioid epidemic in our community. And of course, opioids go kind of hand in hand with methamphetamine as far as addiction and as far as, I think, the kinds of causes that lead to them. So one thing that I think really has pushed our current council to really refocus on addiction and recovery and attending things like this summit are that we've recently started testing our public facilities. And we actually had a lot of our buildings come back positive for methamphetamine. And we know, again, that those things are linked to opioid addiction. So we actually had a building up at our fire management. We had the hospice area of our retirement facility that came back positive. One of our longhouses came back positive. And so these were big blows to our community where we're recognizing that we cannot deny that this is a problem that we need to address. You know, first it was exposing that this was an epidemic, and then now it's, okay, where do we go from here?
It was interesting to sort of talk with community members and see what the issues are with drugs. And when I first started hearing about pills, right, that everybody's on pills here, Autumn. In more recent years, in the last couple of years, what I'm hearing is heroin. And that just seems like, how could that be here? We're a rural community in North Dakota. How could it be that our people are on heroin? That doesn't sound right, but that's what it's compounded to. It affects all of our families. I think we'd be hard pressed to find anybody in Indian country that hasn't been affected by the opioid epidemic. We all know, family members, cousins, aunties, grandmas that have had to take over, raising children of drug addicted parents, and we're all affected by it. We all know somebody that's overdosed as well, and it's just completely torn apart our communities. And what I say is we need to shoot multiple arrows at this problem. So litigation is only one little piece of that, but it's possible that the litigation could result in getting some resources to our community to address these problems. But beyond that, we need to go to Congress. We need to make sure we're getting sufficient funding into our tribal budgets and our healthcare systems in order to address this too.
Our tribal council has placed an emphasis on one of our tribal communities, which is White Swan. There was drug use by young, middle-aged, and older folks. The reliancy, I guess, on the drugs, the addiction, was causing people to borrow, beg, and steal money to buy drugs from the drug dealers in that community. And the crime that was running rampant from the addiction. We always knew there was a few families where the young people were breaking into homes and stealing. Well, it got to where everyone was subject to getting their homes broken into, getting their cars broken into.
In my community, what I'm hearing is that it's the thefts, so that they can support their drug habit, So all of a sudden now our community is not safe. And that's when people started to get like, they're starting to notice what their relatives are willing to do. Abandoning children, losing their children, stealing from their families, that nothing is safe. When I was at the Healing Lodge, I was getting phone calls from some of the tribes. They wanted to know if they could get 10-year-olds in. So you're starting to see younger children becoming drug involved, but I think that because of this escalation in the fatalities, as a result of, I had kids at the Healing Lodge who had passed away at one point and was brought back to life as a result of heroin or opiates. And so it's like, think about that. That's crazy to even say that.
The biggest problem we have is with heroin. We're tending to see a little bit more problem with the methamphetamine. They're showing a little bit more activity there, especially with they're combining the two drugs, and which tends to make it cheaper and more available.
This is an issue not just in Indian country, but this is an issue in our country in general. And there's a lot of overlapping reasons for why a lot of people are falling into addiction, but for Native communities, there's this other level of intergenerational trauma and historical trauma that's still being uncovered and still not fully being addressed. And so how do we just go forward from here?
When you look at the root causes of addiction in general, I think in Indian country, we have to look at our historical trauma, that we're automatically born into these communities that have been affected by genocide. I think, one of the things that I tried to stress to the leadership and the attorneys in this litigation, and, the main things that tribes need and that tribal people want is a voice. We need to create a voice that that somebody can hear, that somebody can listen to and say, I hear you, I think I can help you. I know you're there, I know you're suffering, because I think our people largely feel invisible in today's society. And I think that stems from the generational trauma that we've had. We've been told that we don't matter, right? We've been told that, deal with your own problems. Sometimes tribal sovereignty is looked at it in that way too, is just learn to deal with your own problems.
To get to a addiction-free community, which is a great goal, I think is something we should work towards. In order to get there, we have to address trauma, and then also we need to work a lot on life skills.
People are still operating out of an old paradigm of rehab. It's an old idea about what really treatment and healing and recovery is all about. So much has changed just in the last 5 to 10 years with neuroscience and what we understand now. Because people have, always believed that addiction was kind of a moral decision. But now, with the new research out, that we recognize that it's a brain disorder, that there's a lot going on in the brain. And as much as people want to be well, as much as people want to live healthy, normal lives, the addiction has already grabbed them, and it's not going to be as easy as they thought. So along with the new knowledge around the brain disorder are new research around strategies that we can utilize to help in that healing process. So I'm excited because I've worked around the field of addiction for decades. This is the first time that I felt like finally science has caught up and is really offering us some hope in ways that we can really make some significant advances within our communities. If we can utilize our communities and the tribal value around family and tribe, we can start to make shifts in our communities. But I think that at this moment, tribes are really unclear about what the real problem is. They know that we're struggling and that we're suffering, and that something needs to be done, but I don't think that tribes really understand the nature of addiction the way that we understand it now, and then don't understand the science around then what is treatment going to look like now that we have this new way of understanding what's going on in the brain. Add to that a history of trauma to where, with epigenetics, the study of epigenetics, that it's passed through the blood to each successive generations makes you more vulnerable to PTSD, to to anxiety disorders, those types of things. The other piece of this is what's really exciting for me is that our culture provides the modalities for that kind of healing, even more so now than we ever thought. And the science backs it all up, which is really, that's another cool part. Our cultural practices and our teachings are just right in alignment with what they're suggesting is the best way to treat addiction and trauma.
The biggest tragedy is when we lose a human being. I mean, that could be our relatives and our cousins, our nephews, even our siblings. And so those tend to have the biggest impact on the officers or the police officers, and then also the community, because our community is very tight-knit, and everybody's related to each other pretty much, essentially. So
We've had a few overdoses. Some of the young people that were taken by these overdoses were active within the community. To me, it seems very hard to lose a loved one when you're an adolescent. I know that our adolescents and our teens, our youth were affected by the overdoses that happened in our community.
Like I said, it's just not that one person, it's everybody else that's around the person. So when you see moms that, are pregnant or with little ones and they have these issues, it's very hard, because then they grow up in that type of way. So that's very sad for me that our children are so heavily affected by that.
The biggest tragedy of it is not only the individual themselves' dreams and visions not being fulfilled, because oftentimes you'll have people that are very brilliant will be lost. And then we'll lose anybody, whether they have great skills or not, is terrible. But sometimes you have a great artist, you maybe have somebody that was a good singer or carver or whatever, and when you lose people like that, it's very difficult on the community. Everybody out there is trying to do their best to help, and I've never seen a family or tribal person who hasn't been willing to help.
Right now, we're trying to create an awareness around the mass district litigation that is happening in Cleveland, Ohio. There are over 900 cases filed against the pharmaceutical industry, the manufacturers and distributors of these painkiller drugs that have been shown to be very addictive, where the companies claimed that, or I guess they downplayed the addictive nature of these drugs and over-promoted their use as well. So a lot of people ended up becoming addicted to these drugs. We're trying to get tribes involved because we think that there could be a mass settlement that takes place, a global settlement that takes place in the litigation, and the states, the cities, and the counties are all going to be involved in that. So we want to make sure that tribes aren't left out of that as well.
There's a group of people who received a grant to develop curriculum around historical trauma, and it's supposed to be implemented into school age, but also with families, where you do talk about the kind of deep-rooted traumatic issues that families go through, because in my experience in our community, things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, addiction, all these things aren't necessarily something we talk about. There's that kind of, oh, you don't talk about that mentality, but we're recognizing that a lot of our healing and a lot of the work that needs to be done is to talk about it.
Well, in Suquamish, we have a number of programs and initiatives that are in place to encourage and support recovery. We've got a strong youth program which incorporates a lot of culture, and we do have a pretty robust behavioral health clinic where we provide counseling and outpatient treatment, and then refer out for inpatient treatment as well.
So we are able to provide this intensive kind of like an outpatient approach for them to get the services that they need. They are held accountable for their actions. They're also given incentives for their changes in their behaviors. And the ones that we see be more successful are the ones that are engaged fully in their culture and the community. We started doing community outreach. We call it open court nights. So we try to get a variety of, elders, younger, and what we do is we host and we'll have somebody come in, talk about either brain functioning or, other different topics. So we can kind of educate and also help them understand the issues that we're facing and we're dealing with. We have a Suboxone program, and with that, there's also a meeting that they have to attend. So we're not only dealing with the participant, we're dealing with family, we're dealing with, extended and the community at large.
When we saw the deaths on the increase, we were told to construct a program that we thought could best address the overall wellness of our people, individuals, and families. So that's what we've done. The facility is 10,000 square feet. It provides all of the health services necessary to address the wellness of the individual. We provide support services and we eliminate barriers so that people's lives, whose lives have been disrupted, that they have a reasonable chance to put their lives back together. We provide primary care within the facility because most people that have OUD have had little or no access to primary care. We also break down barriers by providing transportation. We provide social work support services to people. And for adults with children, we also provide on-site childcare so that especially single parents have the ability to come in and access the services that they need. We've worked with great intention to eliminate all the barriers that impede people's ability to access services. That also includes helping people sign up for Medicaid. So when people present and say we want and need help, part of what we've learned is we have to address that plea for help when it presents itself and not delay and defer their access to direct service delivery. Putting together a facility and program like ours is complicated. It can be challenging, but we're a small tribe. We have done it. In some respects, we've started developing a roadmap that other tribes could follow. The program can be economically sustainable because of Medicaid as a primary revenue source for operations. Tribal leadership should not view this as a moral failure of the members that have been victimized by the opioid epidemic. They need help to address their disease. Tribes that have been affected can and should participate in litigation, and I think it's clear that there will be significant revenues flowing to the tribes that participate to address the opiate epidemic as a result of settlements from Big Pharma, and those settlements could be used for portions of the capital investment that I talked about earlier, as well as to get incremental ramp-ups of tribal programs.